Hi class, it's Bill here, continuing with our single table query topic. We started with some of the setup items, but now we want to jump in and actually get down to using the select command itself. We'll spend some more time in Workbench and actually learning how to write these things. So the first thing that we need to know is from the syntax we saw that the select clause is really the only thing that's required. It's the only thing that is not optional. You can use the select clause just to try things. So sometimes you want to see how does that work, what does that math work like, or rather than grabbing your calculator, you have a kind of fancy calculator sitting in front of you, you can use this. So if you wanted to just try some math, try an expression, you can say select, and then you can just type the expression that you're interested in. 4 times 3 plus 18 times 24 minus 4 modulo 3. Then you put your semicolon, of course, you execute the command with Control Enter, and then you're going to see down here what the result is going to be. And in this case, you're going to see that, let's see, where is our result? We should see that here. There we go. 443 is the answer, and it comes out down here. Now, this is an unusual way to use select, but it is possible. So you should know that it's here. If you ever just wanted to kind of try something before you encode it into your SQL, that is certainly possible. And I'm going to close this little result window because I don't want to see it anymore. So that's a thing to know about this, and there's some examples here on this page. Now, the first and most important thing that we need to learn is what is in each clause of select. And the first thing that we're going to want to do is use it to select which columns to include. So one thing that you can do is if you use a star, an asterisk, that will say I want to see all columns. Now, by the way, all of these things, unless we get farther down the road and learn some new things, everything will result in all rows. So what we're talking about here is just which columns, but by default all rows are always going to be included unless we limit them later. So one of the things that we'll do is let's look over at the EX database, double click to set that database. We'll see what tables are here and we'll see what's going on here. Let's see, maybe the customers is going to be a good table for us to use. So you'll notice here that we have all of these columns in the customers table. So if I say select star from, and then I type the name of the table, customers, I put a semicolon and then I execute it, you're going to see that all columns would be returned, right? So here we get all the data and of course by default all rows. So there's all of the customers. Notice that by default we put uppercase, by convention, uppercase keywords, and we put each separate clause on a separate line. So when we're working with single table queries, we're always going to say from and then the name of the table here, and then here on the first line we say what columns, and in this case I said star. Now, you can also specifically ask for certain columns. For instance, I want the customer last name and I want the customer city. If you're nice and things are working right, if it is nice, then it will provide some fill in the blanks, right? Some autocomplete for you. Sometimes autocomplete stops working. I have no idea why. You will get better autocomplete for this though if you do the from clause first. So if I were starting to type this command, I would start here, right? Select from customers. Then you come back and as you start typing, most of what's going to be here is a column, C-O-L-N. And then you can say, oh yeah, customer last name. You can either double click it or you can also do this and you can tab and that will fill it in. So autocomplete is your friend when it works. Again, I have no idea why. Sometimes it doesn't. Wish I could figure that out. So this will tell you I want to select just those two columns, and this is a select list, and that list is going to be separated by commas. Don't put one at the end, but between items put a comma. When I execute that, here's all the customer last names and customer phones, and there they are. All right? The whole list is there. Again, by default, all rows are always included. So you see some examples here, even some examples where you can do math, right? You can say select, and then I want to see the balance from that balance column multiplied by 0.05. So you're welcome to do math as well, and you're also welcome to give new names for the output. Rather than seeing this name, maybe you think that's too hard for people to understand, you want to see this instead, like first, you can say as and then give it a a sort of alias or column header. So here I'm going to say customer last name as last, customer phone as phone. Okay. Now this is going to be fine, but if you have a multiple word rename, you've got to put it in apostrophes. So if I wanted to say last name, and if I wanted to say phone number, then I'm going to put this in apostrophes, right? So that's another way to do it. Multiple word ones must be in apostrophes. Single word ones can or can't. It doesn't make any difference. The other thing to note here is that when I said last, you'll notice that the first time SQL marked this as blue, right? As if it's a keyword, because it is. It must be a keyword because it marked it in blue. If that bugs you, a trick that you can use is to surround it with backticks, and those are little marks that are by your tilde key, usually next to the 1 key on the top of your numeric key, not the numeric keypad, but the normal numbers. So to the far left of the keyboard, if it bugs you, you can put backticks around these kinds of things like that. In this case, SQL didn't freak out. It just looks funny, so don't worry about it, but that's just a little note here. All right, so the other thing that you can do is if you have duplicates, you could suppress them by using the word distinct. So for instance, I don't know that we have this, but let's say I wanted to do this. Do I have any, let's just pull out customer names, and it looks like there aren't any duplicates, so we're never going to really see that. But if we did have them, we just want to know customer last names that we have in the list, and if we have more than one Smith, we're going to only show one of them, right? So that had 23 rows out. It looks like there was a duplicate somewhere, right? So somewhere there was indeed a dupe. So distinct does that. Remember though that distinct is going to cover everything that's listed here. So don't expect it in this case, if I did customer last name and first name, right? Don't expect that that's going to eliminate duplicates of just the last name. In this case, it will be distinct pairings that are eliminated. This will be if somebody has the same first name and last name, that it would get rid of the duplicate. So be aware of that. That's kind of a tricky thing about distinct, is it applies to everything on the line, not just the first thing after the word distinct. So those are some important things about how we can work with columns. All right, here are some notes about that. Control space will also kind of kick auto-completion into gear, so that's another thing that you can do, again, if it's working for you today. And then distinct note we already talked about. Okay, so here's some challenges. I don't have the answers to those in here. That's fine. You can get those when we're in class. We'll work through these things together when you come to class and talk about the answers. One other thing to note here is if you need to put text together, you can use the concat function. The concat function takes as many parameters as you'd like, separated by commas, and it will smush together. That's not a technical term, that's my term. It'll smush together all that text to come out with one result, and you can use that, and sometimes that's useful. And for instance, you want to put the first name and the last name together. So for instance, in our case over here, if we said, for instance, we saw the first and the last, but what if we want the whole name? We could say concat, we open parentheses, we put this, and then we put that, right? And in this case, we don't need to have the as, because the as would come after as name, right? We could do that, but notice that when it smushes it together, it doesn't add space for you. So if you want to add some other text or space between those things, you need to include another literal like this. Oops, and of course no quotation marks in SQL, right? So I want to take the customer last name and then a literal comma space and then the customer first name. That way I get nice spacing and our names look exactly like we'd want them to look. So concat is very useful. Please be aware that I'm not asking you to do this everywhere. So if I just say give the customer name, you don't need to concatenate them together. Some of you will fall in love with concat and go crazy all quarter long. I guess I can't keep you from doing that. But unless I specifically say show it in one column, you don't have to do that. So that's a little bit about concat. Also, if it happens to include numbers, it will turn them into text and include them here as well. So everything gets smushed together. Okay, Next thing to note, that's going to be another exercise using concatenation. Again, we'll do those things in class. We're going to be moving on to some more intricate pieces of syntax. I think we're going to stop the video here because that's a good amount of information. We focused in this video on the select clause and the from clause and what we could do there. In the next one, we're going to move on to working with the where clause, which is a very important part. We'll spend a good bit of time there. So let's stop the video here and we'll pick it up in the next one.